Hey everyone, welcome back to Sierra Spring Ring Digital Edition. I'm Teresa and this is Dueling Rhythms. Today we're going to talk about ways we can extract rhythm information from printed bell music, notes we can write in our bell music to make rhythm more obvious to us, and then ways we can practice rhythm and get a good internal subdivision and beat going even if we actually don't have bells in front of us. And let's be honest, none of us have bells in front of us. So let's start with a few definitions. What is a beat? A beat is the pulse of the music. It's what you tap your foot to when you're listening to something on the radio or on a CD. And when you're dancing, if you're dancing a waltz, you're gonna be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That is a beat. Rhythm is the pattern we build around that beat. It consists of long and short notes and weak and strong accents. So rhythm is always about what's your strong beat and what's your weak beat. So you're never going to just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It's always going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. It's always important to know if you're on the strong or the weak beat, because you might need to play a little louder if you're on the strong beat, and you might need to make sure you're not varying the strong beat if you don't play on that. As bell ringers, I think it's really hard. Like with melody, we don't ever always have the whole rhythm line in our two bells. So you need to know where you fit into that groove that your bell choir is actually setting out for you, so that you don't ruin the groove for them. So let's talk a little bit about some tools we can use. There are two terms that you'll probably hear your director say ad nauseum sometimes. The first one is keep your internal beat going. Well, what does that mean? It means that in your subconscious somewhere, there's a little clock. And as you're playing music, it's beating out those strong and those beats for you. So it's going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Even when you're not playing, even when you've got rests, even when you're turning the page or you've got bell changes, there's always that clock in your head or in your heart or somewhere in your body that's doing the keeping time for you, so you don't have to actively think about it. And then sometimes my director says, you guys need to subdivide. What does that mean? What are they saying? Well, subdividing means taking that beat, or actually taking anything, but in music, it means taking that beat and breaking it down into smaller segments. So sometimes your director wants you, instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, they want you to say 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and, or 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 1 and a 2. So basically you're taking that internal beat and you're putting it into smaller fragments. Why is that important? Well, do you rush half notes, or do you always end up coming in a little bit early when you have a rest the beat before? Subdividing will help that, because it keeps you clocking along with your group even when you're not moving your bells. It can also keep you from dragging too much when you have fast notes. So if you keep that little engine in your head going on the beat, it makes it easier to stay on the beat longer. So let's look at a couple of things we can pull out of music to help us stay on the beat. Okay, so subdividing. What is subdividing? How do I know how to do it? Well, you have to subdivide, but how you subdivide is determined by what your music requires. So if you look at your music and you notice there's a ton of eighth notes in that piece, then in your head you need to be counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, just like this upper right hand corner example. On the other hand, if you're playing in and out of 16th notes, then in your head, you're going to be going 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Triplets, oh, there's so many pieces that are in like a 12/8 feel. So in that case, you would be subdividing into quarter note triplets, which would look something like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Now, this last example is what we call a syncopated rhythm. Syncopation means that you're taking that established pattern of weak and strong beats and you're turning it over in your head so that it's something completely different. So this is Acclamation in G minor by Karen Thompson, and you can see the syncopated pattern happens in measures 15 and 17, and then in measure 16 it actually goes back to the more normal quarter note. So in this case, if I were playing in the bass clef, I would be thinking 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. On the other hand, I can also subdivide 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, something like that. The point is, however you choose to count, even if you're not playing eighth notes, you still need to be tracking them in your head. Otherwise, you risk either going too fast or not fast enough. So this method is probably one of the more universal ways to do it, and it's easily legible, and it's pretty concise, so you're not taking up too much room on the page. So if I were going to count quarter notes, I would count 1, 2, 3, 4. Counting eighth notes, just stick an and in the middle. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 16th notes, 1 e and a 2 e and a 3 e and a 4 e and a. And you notice, even when I'm counting them, I'm still giving accent to that strong beat. That helps me decide where I am in that measure. Triplets, there's a few ways to count triplets. This way I prefer, you might have others, whatever works for you. I go 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. So that is another good way to count all of these notes that are happening in between the beats. Let's look at another good way to extract information from bell music is the time signature. This is like the Rosetta Stone of rhythm in printed music. This tells you a bunch of things. It's this fractioning number at the beginning of the piece and at the beginning of each section. And this tells you, the top number tells you how many beats you have in each measure, and then the bottom number tells you what type of note gets the beat. So the top number says, how many times am I going to tap my foot in that measure? And the bottom number says, what am I tapping my foot to? So 4/4, quarter note, 4 beats per measure, what quarter note gets the beat? 2/4, 2 beats per measure, quarter note gets the beat. 4/4 is also known as common time, and 2/2 is also known as cut time. Cut time is used when you have like a Sousa march, like Stars and Stripes Forever, or something that goes along at a pretty good click, and you're counting in 2. So if we're looking at this piece, this is called Gaudeamus by Arnold Sherman. I love this piece as well. This looks crazy at first guess. What have we got going on here? So what kind of information can we pull out of this piece? Well, if we look at our time signature, this is a piece in 4/4. That's good. I like that. I like the time signature. It's pretty common. With energy, okay, so that means it's not slow. And it looks like I've got 16th notes. Now, I'm going to subdivide into 16th notes because those look like the pretty much predominantly smallest rhythmic block. Here, what can we learn from this piece just looking at it? Well, you can tell that in our bell choir, we've already written in the counting. So we can figure out this crazy syncopated rhythm. You've got a tie here, tie off of a 16th note. The good news is, it actually is pretty universal. So at least for the first 2 measures, almost everyone has the exact same rhythm. And that's one of the tools you can use to pull out information about rhythm, is look for your rhythm buddies. So if you reduce this treble clef line down to the rhythm itself, it actually looks like everyone's got the same rhythm. That rhythm comes back a lot in this piece. So if I know what group of bell ringers I'm supposed to be playing that rhythm with, it's easier for me to find my way. But it's also nice to be the person that everyone looks at and says, hey, she's really good at rhythm. Let me just see what she's doing. This is another argument for subdividing before you come in. Now, if you look at this C part in the middle here, now if this ringer waited till beat 2 and a to count, I guarantee you they're not going to come in on time. So they need to be able to count from the beginning in 16th notes. Subdivide basically 1 e and a 2 e and a. Oh, I come in on the end of 2. So strategies, if you don't start the whole rhythm, make sure you know where that rhythm starts so you know what beat you're adding to it. Another strategy for this crazy, this is also Gaudeamus, is to look for visual cues of the beat. Now, if I were B6, C7, I would be freaking out right now. There's all these ties and mixed syncopated rhythm. What can I do to simplify this? Well, the step before says that we have our rhythm buddies. Almost, well, it looks like all of treble clef has that same rhythm. What's another strategy? Well, look, if you look in the stems down of bass clef, they actually have those big beats for us. So if I can listen for those notes, that'll tell me what beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4 is. This is an argument for being able to read like a keyboard player and train your eyes to read not just your own clef, not just your line in your space or your space in your line, but actually the whole rhythm. So pretend you're playing piano and your left hand is playing those notes. Train your eyes to read vertically and you'll get way more information out of bell music. Also, if you train your eyes to read the whole rhythm line, it helps you figure out where you're at. So let's look at Gaudiamos. What would we write? What do we write notes for ourselves for? Writing in music is absolutely allowed. Just don't use a pen. Pencils are great. The two rules for writing in music are keep it legible so that you know what you're writing, and concise so that you're not distracting from what's on the page. Make sure you have enough information in there to know what you mean, and then not so much information that it covers up other important clues. If I were going to write in this music, this is the actual counting pattern for this rhythm. This looks hokey and it sounds silly, but this is actually really effective. So practice your counting. Don't be afraid to write in your rhythm counting here. Another technique, which is this one here, where actually we've put hash marks all the way vertically through the big beats. Now, there's a couple of limitations with this method. If you're looking at this right now, you can tell that it's super messy and it can get really distracting. And use this technique sparingly, maybe once or twice, but if you use it every bar, it quickly becomes just horribly distracting for everyone else. So I don't know, this one works, but don't use it too much. Okay, so if we look at another piece, this piece is called Sail Away, and it's arranged by Kevin McChesney. You might also know it as Orinoco Flow, and I think Enya was the one that sang this one. If you can, now, this is another piece. Well, let's look at time signature 4/4. Let's look at what the rhythm groove is. Oh, it looks like Stems Down Bassline has this lovely little malleted riff, pretty much straight eighth notes, so I'm going to subdivide eighth notes. Now, if you look at treble clef, they've got this syncopated pattern going on. Strategies for this would be you need to start subdividing in this rest. And look at all these crazy rests. Now, if you check out during these rests, your chances of coming back in on the right beat are going to be quite low. So practice in your head counting even when you're not actively ringing the bells. Same thing with long notes like tied notes or whole notes. Just because it's a whole note doesn't mean you're not actively playing that note. So keep that little clock going in your head. You can see we've actually written in the little pickups, and it's kind of a fun groove. This is a good song to groove to. So also an argument for being able to read bass clef and treble clef at the same time, because if you look at bass clef, stems down, they've got almost that whole bar of rhythm. So if you can see that they're playing on the eighth notes, it's going to be a lot easier for you to come back in at the right time. All right, so this piece is another arrangement by Kevin McChesney. This is Pirates of the Caribbean, and this is a really good example of a pretty common phenomenon in music where you have different rhythm patterns in the melody and in the accompaniment. So if you look at the bass line, they've got this nice malleted groove. It's kind of like a jig. It's going something like, okay, and that's a pretty solid 6/8 pattern, right? So if you look at the treble clef, it looks like a 3/4 bar. And this is something that's going to sound like, right? Everyone knows this melody. This is a really effective method for adding contrast and energy to a piece of music, and it makes the beats that you have in common really pop out when you land on them. So beat one in this case is going to be the common beat for bass clef and treble clef, your strong common beat at least. And so you've got this tension throughout the bar until you hit one again, and then everyone's in sync. So it's a really effective rhythm. This 3/2 feel is actually called a hemiola, and it's used on almost every culture. Listen for it and you'll hear it. It's a really fun one to play around with. So what is rhythm? Rhythm is like other parts of music. Rhythm is all about pattern recognition. So just as you're learning how to ring a bell, what it looks like to weave, what it feels like to play this particular passage, well, rhythm is the same way. You have to be able to listen to a rhythm and think, oh, how is that going to look in this time signature? How will it look in another time signature? Now, if you look at these two lines here, this top line is in 4/4. This bottom line is in 4/8. They both have 4 beats per measure. So either of those rhythms will sound something like this. Now, the tempo might be different in one versus the other, but they're still going to have that same signature pattern. So when you don't have bells in front of you, you can still practice your rhythm skills. And the best way to do that is to involve your body. Clap. You can always clap rhythms that are hard, not just the bells you ring. Pick out the whole rhythm line and put it in your hands. Even better is if you can involve your body in multitasking. So put the beat in your foot, stomp your foot while you're clapping your hands. That actually internalizes that pattern a lot faster because it involves more muscle memory. So you're getting it into your active memory faster. I have, these are called rhythm sticks. They're just basically painted wooden dowels. You can use drumsticks. You can use anything with a decent grip and enough weight. You can hit them on each other. You can also hit them carefully on a surface of your choice. I like these because you can also practice your sticking patterns for mallet passages when you don't have mallets or bells in front of you. This is a shaker egg. I also think they're pretty inexpensive online. This is great for subdividing. So if you notice that you're rushing your quarter note patterns a lot, put the quarter note pattern in your foot and actually subdivide the 16th notes in here so you can get a feel for where you're rushing. This is great too for tempos that are so fast you literally cannot count the subdivision. Like if you're dividing 16th notes and it's you know, ticka 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 ticka, I can't count that fast. This will actually count pretty fast without a lot of work on it, and it's kind of fun to do. Other methods, stomp your foot, body percussion. There's a whole topic called body percussion that I don't have time to teach, but it's basically making sound using your body. So you can slap, you can cup, you can use your shoulders, legs, abdomen. Put the pattern you're trying to learn into different areas of your body and see if you can figure out the pattern and how it works. That's a great method for rhythm, internalizing the beat and then also internalizing those patterns of rhythm. If you have other instruments, don't be afraid to take a rhythm pattern that you're struggling on bells on and take the whole line and think about how you'd play it on an instrument. Keyboard players, if you have you guys are amazing. I don't know how you do it, but usually they have like 2 rhythms going at once. So figure out where would your groove be and where would your melody come in. String players, I play cello. If you can figure out how would you bow that rhythm, is it like down, up, up? Are you going to slur it? A couple of up bows. Wind players, wind and brass, how would you tongue it? Would it be short, long, long, short? Would you double tongue it? Stuff like that will help you, just another way of approaching rhythms, because bells is just awkward sometimes when you don't have that whole line to rely on. So you have to figure out how to get it internalized without actually physically playing every single note in that line. Listen to music. Practice not just listening to it passively, but active listening. So if you're listening to music, and always choose music you're not familiar with, because there's a whole range of rhythms that you're never going to come across if you only listen to one artist or one genre. So really try to broaden your horizons as far as the kind of music you listen to. But listen to music and figure out how many beats are in it per measure. Tap your foot, figure out how many times am I tapping my foot per measure. And then figure out how those beats are subdivided. Are we subdividing them into triplets? Are we doing 2 notes? Are we doing 4 notes? Is it syncopated like a 7/8 feel? Figure out what would the time, if you had to write down that that pattern, what time signature would you use? Would it be 3/4? Would it be 6/8? It's always good to kind of internalize music you listen to, and then pick out a groove. Take a 4-bar pattern and figure out what's the groove in the accompaniment, and then how would that look on a piece of paper if I were going to write that rhythm down. There's lots of, you probably have more than one answer. That's okay. There's lots of ways to write rhythm down, but the important thing is that you're internalizing it and then expressing it. Let's see, my time is almost up. So this is Dueling Rhythms class, and Unfortunately, it's hard to duel on Zoom connection, but if you look in the description underneath the video, there is a link to a packet full of resources you can use to keep exploring rhythm even when you're not watching this class. There's a couple of games. I call it Dueling Rhythms games. You can play with a partner or you can play it with a group. Just split yourselves in half. And there's also practice counting rhythms, practice writing in rhythms, and kind of exposure to rhythms in different time signatures. As far as music, if you are familiar with Spotify, there actually is a playlist out there, and that'll be a link in the packet as well. There's a playlist here you can practice your active listening for different rhythms. Some of them have intros, so just stick with it for a minute or so. Some of them are actually sets, so you might have 2 or 3 different rhythm patterns going on throughout the piece. But listen to 1 or 2 songs at a time, or whenever you have a minute. So that's it for Dueling Rhythms class. If you have any suggestions for interesting rhythm pieces, put them in the comments below and I'll add them too. You're welcome to go back and watch this class again. You can pause it on those examples of music and work through them at your own speed. I know this was kind of a whirlwind. Sorry, 20 minutes is not a lot of time to talk about anything, let alone a subject like rhythm. But when you're practicing, always start slow. It's tempting to start fast, the way you hear it on the radio, and you actually need to start slow because, like anything else, you build up speed as you go. But you need to start steady first, and then the speed will come with practice. So enjoy and have fun at the rest of Spring Ring, and hopefully it tides you over until we can ring bells again. Anyway, good night.
Thanks, Teresa, for that great class. We are back in our roundtable, and we have Teresa with us, Laura, Barb, Walsh, and Artie again. And Artie, before we actually give away our top winners, I believe people have a little bit more time. How many people did we have playing our game?
So far, it says that we have about 109 people playing, so it is a pretty competitive game.
Wow.
Wow. And we'll share the winners at the end of this discussion before our next class, correct?
Correct.
So you have a little bit more time if you'd still like to play. Teresa, you did a fabulous job of giving us so many definitions at the top of that, but I have one more for our director to clarify for us. What is syncopation?
Syncopation is where the accent falls where you don't expect it. Usually we expect it to fall right on the beat, but it'll fall on an upbeat very often. So it could be, if you're doing 8th notes, it could be on and, or if you're doing 16th notes, it could be on one E and duh. So it's just where the accent shifts to where you don't expect it to be.
Oh, so when we are doing our rhythms and we're playing along either syncopated or straight rhythms and we are subdividing, I know we all have different ways that we like to subdivide. Would each of you share how you choose to subdivide your music in your head? Starting with, oh, I think that was Artie who took a breath in. Go ahead, Artie.
Yeah, I could do it. So the way I like to subdivide my head first, I actually use this. I'm a big dot dot person. So as long as I'm accenting the big notes, I'm like dot 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 dot. Just because I feel like I can think a lot faster with a lot of those rhythms. I'm a percussionist first, so I do that all the time. Saying 1E and a 2E is really hard for me, and saying that in my head is also just as difficult. So I've really kind of picked that in my head, and I always subdivide depending on what I'm really thinking about. So,
Barb, what about you?
I have a tendency to go. I do the same thing, trying to get numbers and letters and everything else going through my head at the same time if it's going fast enough. I also get it into my body a lot better if I have some sort of neutral syllable, like ch works well for me.
Laura, what's your preferred method of subdivision?
Well, when I first learned on piano and handbells, I was taught the one-e-anda method, so that works for me. I'll just say it silently in my head. But if I need something a little bit more, I might use my hands or my toes to tap it along with me, especially if I have a measure where I'm not playing and I have a little rest time. It helps to use my feet to kind of get into the rhythm before my notes come along.
And Teresa, what is your preferred method of subdivision?
So I'm a terrible cello player. I love to tap my foot, which is not awesome in orchestra, but it works pretty well at other places. I also love like da, dit, dit, da, or any sort of articulations that tells me what the length of the beat is and like what's accented. So depends on the situation.
And I am a wind player primarily, so I tend to do tonguings as my subdivision, kind of like the percussionist. So how do we, this is for Barb, my director always tells me I'm behind the beat. How do I fix that? What can I do?
Well, obviously subdividing is always a really good idea, but I find that a lot of times there's a couple of mechanical problems, like you aren't ready to play and you're not keeping up with the music. It's, a lot of times people will just kind of check out, oh, I have a rest, but continuing to be a part of the music and just having your technique ready to go, ready to ring. If your bells are forward or back here, you'll probably be behind the beat. You do have to start your intention early. So if you are subdividing, that will help you to start your intention early. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating I was an elementary music teacher, and one of the games that we would play was bounce high, bounce low. And we would bounce one of those rubber playground balls around in a circle, and you had to bounce it in front of your neighbor on the beat. And it was really interesting to see how the kids processed that, because a lot of times they'd let the ball go on the beat, and then of course it would be behind the beat when it hit the neighbor. So you have to anticipate, and again, we would be singing the song, and so you have to stay engaged. So those things are probably the biggest things that you have to think about and do in order to make sure that you don't end up behind the beat.
That sounds like a really fun song to play with adults too. Do you think Tintab could play it when we get back together?
I think we should.
Would you be willing to share a video of you singing the song for other handbell ensembles so they could try it as well?
I think I could do that. Yeah. I just have to find the rubber playground ball.
I have one of those.
All right.
Elementary music teacher too. I have lots of those. So when you're looking at your music for Teresa and Laura, how do you decide what level of subdivision you should use with a song?
I base it on what I'm actively playing for the next few bars, or what the main groove. Always find that groove in the music, and then that'll tell you what you need to subdivide in your head. It might change. Different sections of music have different subdivisions, but always look ahead if you can. Train your eyes to read a couple bars ahead.
I think it also helps too to see what other people are playing. So even if you're only playing whole notes or half notes or even quarter notes, if there's 16th notes or 8th notes in the piece that other members are playing, you want to make sure that you're hearing those and maybe using them to make sure you're actually playing your beat on time.